gang. Just want to go through an article here. Now, I wrote the article, but the data, the data is comes from various sources. So let's read through the article first, and let's take a look. I'd like to talk to you today about women's liberation and whether or not it has been a success. Now, as you might see from the subtitle here, I think perhaps it hasn't gone exactly according to plan, as a lot of left-wing ideas seem to have gone. Now, before I even get started, you might find it somewhat interesting. I didn't put it in the article, but it's somewhat interesting that the person who started Miss Magazine, the name escapes me at the moment, came out and thanked the CIA for helping her start up Miss Magazine. So that might be of some interest to some of you, and for the rest, join in, because I hope that this will be a funny experience. All right, let's go. The women's liberation movement made great strides in Western society, promoting ideals of sexual freedom and freedom to enter the job market unfettered. Freedom is, of course, something that should be cherished. But that doesn't mean that the results are always positive. Simply having the right to choose does not mean our choice is without consequence. So let's take a look at how it all turned out. Finding the one remains as important as ever. However, there are major consequences to turning away from the tradition of avoiding sex before marriage, having multiple sex partners, and becoming sexually active young. It turns out all of these things directly prevent the likelihood of marriage, when it does happen, to work out. The younger girls are, when they have their first sexual encounter, the more partners they will likely have. Girls and women with more than 20 sexual partners have worse life outcomes, and a 80% chance their first marriage will end in divorce. In addition, having more than 20 sexual partners yields a 40% chance that woman will have an STD. Let's take a look at the data. Delay of sexual initiation reduces number of voluntary lifetime partners. And this is the name of the study, or the retrospective, whatever the hell you want to call it. Anyway, that's pretty bad for a guy that did so good in statistics. I don't even remember what it's called. All right, anyway. Initiation of sexual activity at a younger age is linked to high numbers of sexual partners. The earlier a woman begins sexual activity, the more sexual partners she will have during her lifetime. Girls who begin voluntary sexual activity at 13 to 14 will have, on average, more than 13 voluntary sexual partners during their lives. By contrast, women who begin sexual activity at age 23 or 24 will have, on average, 2.7 sexual partners during their lifetime. Pretty well their husbands and the mailman. Or the pool boy. Maybe that's the 0.7. Anyway, onward we go. Earlier onset of sexual activity is linked to higher turnover rates among sexual partners. One reason that girls who begin sexual activity in teen years may have... Let's go back for a second. As you can see here, on the Y we have average number of voluntary lifetime sexual partners for women, aged 15 to 44. Age of first voluntary sexual intercourse. So 12 and younger, they will likely have on average 20 sexual partners. 13 to 14, 13.77. 8.06 for 15 to 16. 6.6 sexual partners for girls that start having sex at 17 to 18. 4.5 for girls that start having sex between 19 and 20. and we'll continue on down to 1.8 sexual partners for girls that initiate sex after they turn 26. Earlier onset of sexual activity is linked to higher turnover rate among sexual partners. Whoops. One reason that girls who begin sexual activity in teen years may have more sexual partners during their lifetime is that they may have been sexually active for more years than women who initiated sexual activity at older ages. That's common sense. Pardon me. However, women who begin sexual activity at early ages also have far higher turnover rates among sexual partners. That means the sex partner turnover rate may be defined as the number of voluntary sexual partners per year of sexual activity. So girls who begin sexual activity at 13 or 14 have, on average, 1.2 partners per year of sexual activity. By contrast, women who begin to have sexual activity at ages 21 to 22 have 0.3 sex partners per year of sexual activity. Thus, women who become sexually active at ages 13 to 14 have a partner turnover rate 4 times higher than those who initiate sex in their early 20s. Less faithful, and less dedicated, and on with the next. Thank you, next, something like that. And that's source is the CDC National Center for Health Statistics. Delay in sexual activity cuts the odds of contracting sexually transmitted diseases. For girls who are 12 and younger, what do we have here? Percent of sexually active women aged 13 to 14 ever infected. So, beginning sexual activity at a young age greatly increases the probability of becoming infected with sexually transmitted diseases. Girls who began sexual activity at age 13 are twice as likely to become infected by an STD when compared to girls who started sexual activity at 21. Some 18% of girls who began sexual activity at age 13 to 14 have contracted syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, genital warts, or genital herpes, or self-report a high likelihood of HIV. By contrast, around 8% of women who begin sexual activity at age 21 have been infected by these diseases. That's the Center for Disease Control, National Center for Human Statistics, and I'll just stop saying it. You can read that for yourself. So here's the graph here. Take a look at it, and I'll continue in the interest of time. Beginning sexual activity at an older age reduces the probability of out-of-wedlock pregnancy. I don't even think people care about that anymore, so we're just going to skip that. Delay in sexual activity reduces the odds of out-of-wedlock childbearing. Well, what the hell? Women who begin sexual activity at an early age are far more likely to give birth out of wedlock. Nearly 40% of girls who commence sexual activity at ages 13 to 14 will give birth outside marriage. By contrast, 9% of women who begin sexual activity at ages 21 to 22 will give birth outside marriage. Delay in sexual activity reduces the odds of becoming a single mother. Now, if you want your children to do well, you would certainly be interested in doing that. But let's leave that subject for another day. So, let's read that here. This chart covers mothers with children, women who begin sexual activity at an earlier age are more likely to become single mothers. More than half the mothers with children who become sexually active at ages 13 to 14 were single parents at the time of the survey. By contrast, only 15.7% of mothers with children who commenced sex activity at ages 21 to 22 were single parents at the time of the survey. Single motherhood includes currently single mothers who are separated, divorced, or widowed, or have never been married. Now, I don't know if it's very fair to include widowed in that, but nevertheless. Delay in sexual activity leads to greater marital instability. Delay in sexual activity leads to greater marital stability. So here we have the chart. And this chart measures the percentage of sexually active women over age 30 who were in stable marriages. A woman was defined as being in a stable marriage if she was married at the time of the survey and had been in that same marriage for more than 5 years. Girls who began sexual activity in their teens clearly have greater difficulty in forming and sustaining stable marriages. Let's do that again. Delay in sexual activity leads to greater marital stability. This chart measures the percentage of sexually active women over age 30 who were in a stable marriage. A woman was defined as being in a stable marriage if she was married at the time of the survey and had been in the same marriage for more than 5 years. Girls who began sexual activity in their teens clearly have greater difficulty in forming and sustaining stable marriages. 2/3 of women who began sexual activity at ages 21 to 22 were in stable marriages, and by contrast, only 27.7% of girls who began sexual activity at age 13 to 14 were in stable marriages. Delay in sexual activity is linked to lower levels of child and maternal poverty. This chart shows the poverty rate of mothers with children at the time of the survey. Early sexual activity is linked to higher levels of child and maternal poverty. Some 27% of mothers who began sexual activity at ages 13 or 14 were living in poverty at the time of the survey. By contrast, 11.7% of mothers who began sexual activity at ages 21 or 22 were poor at the time of the survey. Beginning sexual activity at an older age reduces the probability of abortion. Girls who began sexual activity at an earlier age far more likely to have abortions. Nearly 30% of girls who started sexual activity at 13 to 14 have had an abortion. By contrast, some 12% of girls who began sexual activity at 21 or 22 have had an abortion. Delay in sexual activity is linked to greater happiness. There's an odd dip here. It seems like the optimal time is 21 to 22 or 23 to 25. Not sure why that would taper off. Maybe if you never had sex, it's 26 plus. Maybe if you're a virgin when you're like 50 years old, you're not quite so happy, but nevertheless. Beginning sexual activity at an older age is linked with higher levels of personal happiness. More than half the women who began sexual activity at ages 21 or 22 report they are feeling very happy in life. By contrast, only 1/3 of women who began sexual activity at 13 or 14 report they are currently very happy. Beginning sexual activity at an older age reduces depression. Women who began sexual activity at an early age are more likely to feel unhappy or depressed. Around 7% of women that started sexual activity at ages 13 or 14 report that they currently feel not very happy or very unhappy. By contrast, women who began sex activity later are less likely to report feelings of depression, Around 3% of women who began sex activity at ages 21 or 22 state that they are currently feeling not very happy or very unhappy. And of course, you would expect this to jump a little bit for people that never engaged in sexual intercourse or did it very late in their lives. But the surprise is a little jump here from 19 to 20, a little statistical anomaly. Could be a number of reasons, but doesn't say, and I don't want to speculate. Women who have more non-marital sex partners are more likely to be infected with sexually transmitted diseases. That's a no-brainer. So this is percent of sexually active women aged 15 to 44 and number of lifetime non-marital partners. So this is, I'm not sure where 5 fits in, but let's read it. This chart shows the impact of increases in the number of lifetime sexual partners on the chances of being infected by a sexually transmitted disease. The chart covers all sexually active women. Women with 0 non-marital partners have had sex only with men whom they married. Some 3.6% of sexually active women who have had 0 non-marital partners have contracted syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, genital warts, genital herpes, or have self-reported high risk of HIV. By contrast, the STD infection rate of women with 11 to 15 non-marital sexual partners is nearly 10 times higher. Some 30% of these women have been infected. Women who have more voluntary non-marital sexual partners are more likely to give birth out of wedlock. I think that's self-explanatory, so I'll just skip that. Women who have more non-marital sexual partners are more likely to become single mothers. Women who have more non-marital sexual partners are less likely to have stable marriages. Women who have more non-marital sexual partners are more likely to have abortions. Women who have more non-marital sexual partners are less likely to be happy. This is all from the CDC. Women who have more non-marital sexual partners are more likely to be depressed. And that's all, folks. Having more sexual partners has revealed to cause dependency on drugs and alcohol down the road. Here we have an article from Psychology Today. The lingering psychological effects of multiple sex partners. Excuse me. The mental health consequences of having multiple sexual partners were long thought to include greater rates of anxiety and depression. At the same time, high rates of alcohol and substance abuse were thought to increase the chances of young adults engaging in unsafe sex with multiple partners. New research from a longitudinal study of over 1,000 New Zealanders shows that, surprisingly, neither of these assertions are true. The majority of studies citing a relationship between mental health problems, including substance and alcohol abuse and number of sex partners, are correlational in nature. As a result, it's impossible to tell whether people seek sex partners in an effort to self-medicate. In other words, to reduce the emotional pain they are experiencing by seeking sexual connections with others, even if fleeting. The correlation does not equal causation problem in these studies also means that people with a high-risk lifestyle both seek sexual liaisons and substance use, either because they have impulsive personalities or because they are anxious and depressed. They considered wisdom from such research, problematic as it was, led mental health experts to argue that in order to reduce the rates of risky sexual behavior, it's necessary to treat the underlying psychological issues that lead individuals to these outlets for their unhappiness or personality styles. For both men and women, taking into account prior psychological disorders, the odds of developing substance dependence increased virtually linearly with the number of sex partners. The relationship was particularly pronounced, however, for women. People having a high number of sex partners did not have higher rates of anxiety or depression. The mental health effects were limited to substance abuse. And you can read the study here. Or the abstract, rather. Changes in sexual behavior have resulted in longer periods of multiple sexual partners. Let's see the results. The study established a strong association between numbers of sex partners and later substance disorder, especially for women, which persisted beyond prior substance use and mental health problems more generally. The reasons for this association deserve investigation. It makes sense that before you get married, I was always told this by my dad, but it makes sense that before you get married, you should live with the person for a bit and try it out. Try out how life would be with them. According to Oxford, this is a very bad idea, though, if you want the marriage to actually work out. Again, less traditional marriages are unlikely to succeed. You may be tempted to think the marriage fails because of the patriarchy or something like that, but I should remind you that women themselves are overwhelmingly more likely than men to initiate divorce proceedings. Here's that article. Reassessing the link between women's premarital cohabitation and marital quality. And you're welcome to come check that out. From 2,898 women from a national longitudinal survey. That's a very good sample size. Of course, studies with a humongous sample size are also more likely to come up with statistically significant results. So that's just bear that caveat in mind. Surprisingly, couples that have more egalitarian views on who should be the breadwinner and who should manage the household have far less sex with couples, or excuse me. Surprisingly, couples that have more egalitarian views on who should be the breadwinner and who should manage the household have far less sex than couples with more traditional roles. Here's that article. Husbands who don't do wives' chores get 20 times more sex per year, as does the wife, of course. Couples have sex 5 times a month on average, U.S. researchers found, but when the wife does all the housework, they have sex 1.6 times more per month. So there's an interesting article there. Of course, if a woman does decide she would like to pursue a career, she is less likely to be happy than if she were to be a homemaker. And this is an interesting article from Slate, not exactly a right-wing propaganda outlet, but here you can see exactly the extent of that. Career-oriented women tend to be less attractive. Here's that study. Accordingly, the low male sex ratio produced the strongest desire for lucrative careers in women who are least able to secure a mate. These findings demonstrate that the sex ratio has far-reaching effects in humans, including whether women choose briefcase over baby. Well, you can read this study. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. I am about it, but it makes kind of some logical sense. If you're unattractive and you can't secure a mate for yourself, what else are you going to do? So, nevertheless, you can read into that however you would like to. Perhaps what says it all is that women are less happy than they were in the 1960s, when the women's liberation movement began. Oof. You would hope that a major civil rights movement would make people happier, but this is just not the case. And here's that article from the New York Times. Last year, a team of researchers added a novel twist to something known as a time use survey. Instead of simply asking people what they had done over the course of their day, as pollsters have been doing since the 1960s, the researcher also asked how people felt during such activity. Were they happy, interested, tired, stressed? Not surprisingly, men and women often gave similar answers about what they like to do and don't like. But there were also a number of activities that produced very different reactions from the two sexes. And one of them really stands out. Men apparently enjoy being with their parents, while women find time with their mom and dad to be slightly less pleasant than doing laundry. Well, that's not good. Anyway, it's an interesting article there for you as well. I'll check that out if you would like. Of course, it's much more difficult now for a household to survive on one income, making traditional marriages more difficult to obtain in the first place. This is also due in large part to women's liberation. Doubling the workforce in a very short amount of time obviously would drive wages down, as there were more people to compete for the same job. As divorce rates grew, commodities and housing prices rose due to the sharp increase in demand. You double the houses, we're both getting different houses. We're not marrying, going into one house, getting one car, maybe two cars, but one TV, one bed, you get the idea. You have to furnish now two houses, two homes. And so this increase in demand obviously drives up the prices for these commodities. Failed presidential candidate and Harvard Law School's first woman of color, Elizabeth Warren, wrote a whole book on it called The Two-Income Trap. And check it out. Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, if you can believe it. Anywho, that's all for today. Please, if you found that interesting, come to saltspeechadvocates.com. Currently, it's saltspeechadvocates.wordpress.com because I happen to let my bill lapse a little bit. But anyway, nevertheless, this is a host of a bunch of different topics. As you can see here, lots of controversial issues. Just some spicy things, one after another. Trying to take on pretty well anything that I heard that turned out to, worthy of investigating and turning out to be the exact opposite of what we're told or what we would expect. Also, I should like to recommend Barry Schwartz's video. He did a TED Talk some decade ago, at least a decade ago, back when TED Talks were, interesting. All about the paradox of choice. And when you have more options and more things are available to you, you tend to be less happy. You get happier for a while, but then it drops off dramatically. For example, he uses this, which is you go to a store nowadays, and there's maybe 100 different varieties of jeans. Do you want acid wash? Do you want stone wash? Do you want boot cut? Do you want bell bottom? Yada yada yada. So with all the different varieties, you think that certainly I'm going to find the perfect pair of jeans for me. My expectations rise. And then when I purchase those jeans and walk out with them, I have a feeling of dissatisfaction. They are good. They're definitely better than what I could have got in the past when only one type of jean was available. But they're not the best they could be. And I feel like I could have chosen something even better than the choice that I walked away with. And so I'm left with a feeling of dissatisfaction. Where if I bought the only jeans available, even though they were less comfortable and didn't look quite the way that I wanted it, if it was the only option, I was more inclined to enjoy it. Anyway, that's Barry Schwartz's The Paradox of Choice, and it's a very interesting 20 minutes. Anyway, please go and check out my website if you would like. Check out my channel on BitChute, which, if you're watching this video, let's face it, you already are. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you found this interesting and would like to see more content like this. Thank you very much, and have an average day.